Hello, and welcome to my review for the 2018 film Wildlife, written by Paul Dano and Zoe Kazan, and directed by Paul Dano, which I believe is his directorial debut. Fantastic actor, big fan of Paul Dano. I think that he's a really versatile and effective actor. Like, he always just seems to really nail the role he's in, even if those roles can be very different at times. And Zoe Kazan, who I believe is his partner, I really enjoy as an actress, and was surprised to see that she had co-written this film with him, and it's based on a novel from the 90s, I believe. And I read that the author of the novel said, don't feel a slave to the book, make your own thing with kind of the story, which seems like a really cool way to approach it. But before we get to the film, at this point I feel like 2018 has passed. You know, I want to review every film I saw in 2018. I got to about 45, I think. And I've now seen almost 100 films. So why am I talking about this one? Because I don't see anyone talking about it. I was intrigued by the cast alone, which is Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal, who I'm big fans of. Particularly Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he is one of the great actors of this generation, and I think he's phenomenal in pretty much everything he does. And so based on that alone, I wanted to see it. Paul Dano directing made it even more intriguing to me. Knew nothing about the story. Went in blind and was kind of knocked out by it. So I kind of just wanted to make a video to kind of hopefully inspire one or two people to actually go and check it out. So the story revolves around a family, played by Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal, the mother and father of a teenage son, 14 years old. And I really wish I had looked to see what the actor's name was, because I thought he was incredible. In the most unremarkable, unincredible way you could possibly imagine. And that's kind of the whole selling point for this film, I think, is it's a very restrained movie. The majority of the drama and the conflict is going on underneath the skin of these characters. It's this thinly veiled conflict that is just waiting to burst out. But in most normal situations, people don't let those feelings explode out of them, particularly in the time period in which this is set, which I don't know what it is exactly. It looks 60s to me, could be 50s, but it's around that period, 50s, 60s. And it has that aesthetic, as in the way characters are dressed, but it isn't like screaming like this is a 50s, 60s movie. That is kind of just the setting. And I feel like the way that families were supposed to operate back then is a lot different than they're supposed to act now. You know, it just seemed like back then it was very much a kind of regimented, right? You get married when you leave school, you have kids, you get the house, da 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 da. You know, like, this is the way you should make your life. The nuclear family. And that's what they have. And at the beginning you see how happy they really are. They've moved to a new place in Montana, and they're getting by. The wife doesn't work. She stays at home with not with the son all the time. He goes to school as well. But she's the stay-at-home, you know, wife. And the husband, he goes and works at a country club, which he gets swiftly fired from because he's too personable with the clients. And he just remarks how ridiculous this is. You know, I've been fired for being too nice and personable, you know. What can I do from here? And he goes through a real crisis of pride, I think. And he's struggling to find a new job, or he's struggling to accept a new job. And in the kind of periphery of this story, way off in the mountains, is a forest fire. And they need people to go. They don't just take the firefighters, they take people who can go and, you know, kind of lend a hand. And ultimately he decides to go off and deal with these wildfires, which his wife is incensed about. She thinks that it's irresponsible, that it's dangerous. He could risk dying and leaving his family, you know, without him. And also it's a way of running away. And he does it anyway. And we follow the mother and the son as they try and deal with his absence. And it's something that they're both not happy with, and it's something that they both try to move on from in a way, in different ways. And I just think that the performance of the son, Joe, the actor, broke my heart, just in the sense that he felt like one of the most believable characters I've ever seen in a film, in a way, just to the point where I didn't see anyone acting in that performance. I saw a teenage boy reacting to the difficulties of his life. There's no point where I felt like I saw someone trying to act, you know, like he was going through something. I believed every fucking second. And Carey Mulligan, likewise, I felt every tear of her hurt at her husband leaving like that, and I felt every ounce of reasoning that he probably felt was right for him to do that. I don't feel like any character is doing anything wrong, and yet they're all kind of diverging from each other while trying to stay together. And it's one of those stories where it's not about it all working out in the end, because that's not how life works. And sometimes people drift apart, and sometimes people don't realize what they need to do to stay together. You know, I feel like at the beginning you see how happy that family was, but then we learn that they've moved a lot, and that this sort of thing seems to happen quite a lot. It's a recurring problem in the family, and maybe maybe these two people weren't meant to be together, or maybe they just they don't know how to fix it. And sometimes people don't. They don't know how to fix it. And I think the reason I connected to it most strongly is because my mum and dad split up. And I was too young to ever really be cognizant of that fact. But it was something where I think they both loved each other very deeply, but they didn't know how to fix it. They didn't know how to kind of keep those pieces together. They're two very volatile and kind of almost explosive personalities in a sense, and I think that they just rubbed each other the wrong way after a couple of years. And so I was left with my mum. And so I kind of really felt what he was going through with the young kid, and that's probably why I love it so much. And I think people might watch this and think it's a good film. It's done well. There's good performances and whatnot, but it's, you know, it doesn't dig deep enough and whatnot. And that's fine. I wouldn't disagree with that. And you know, it goes back to that whole thing of I keep quoting it, the Juzo Itami quote, where he says, "I can only ever make 50% of a film," right? The other 50% is made in the audience member who sat down and watching the film. That's just the way it is. Your own experiences come from within you, and they kind of meld with what you're seeing on screen. And I connected so deeply with this film because of it. Not that I've been in a situation like this, but I felt echoes of what happens in this film in my own life, and it zoned me into the film so much. I'm a snacker when it comes to films. I love having snacks, crisps, you know, some chocolate here and there. And I got some snacks, I put them down the table, and I didn't touch a single thing. I didn't want to, like, miss anything. And that rarely happens. The film is shot well. There's a really beautiful score to it. And the acting, again, I think is really stellar from the three leads of the film. And Jake Gyllenhaal, even though he kind of takes a big absence in the kind of middle of the film there, I think that he's just so... there's the scene when he gets on that truck to go up to the mountains, and you just see his reaction. He's just an incredible actor, you know, and I'm almost getting kind of emotional thinking about it and talking about it now, because I'm just thinking about the ending. And this is something that is a revelation to me, and I want to talk about it. I have been choked up at films hundreds of times. It's very easy for me, especially in, I'll say, later life. I'm only 30, but, you know, as I've grown older, into my 20s, I would say, it became a lot easier for me to get emotionally invested in movies and moved by movies and choked up, for sure. And I'd say that I have rolled a tear or two and let those tears kind of just silently trickle down maybe a dozen times in my life. This is the first time I've actually cried, and I've never understood it. When people say, "Oh, I cried at that film," I'm like, "What, you mean, you know, a couple of tears rolled down?" No, I was like sobbing. I'm like, come on, get over it. It's a film. Like, what would make you, like, you know, seriously cry over a film? And again, I wasn't sobbing or anything, but I was pretty damn close. I welled up a few times in the film, but the final scene, it wrecked me. And it wrecked me for a very specific reason that I won't go into. But as an idea, I think it was just so heartbreaking but heart completing at the same time. It was like taking the absolute worst of a situation and taking something and putting it back together again. If only for a moment. If only for an imperfect moment. To the point where it's just something there that I can hold on to, right? And if you've seen the film, you should know what I'm talking about, and I'm sorry for anyone who hasn't, I'm being very vague, but I thought it was a fucking beautiful ending. And I get emotional. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like, you know, it's that kind of, I've hit 30 now, and I'm just going to get really emotional about everything, but midlife crisis. I just, yeah, I cried a bit at the end of the film when the credits rolled. And it felt good, actually, and it felt nice to be so deeply affected by something. And again, I wouldn't say this is like a masterpiece of a film. I wouldn't say it's like the best film of the year, but I'd say it's a film that people should check out because it isn't one that's getting, you know, big talk or anything like that. And I would say that it's possibly the most impressive acting I've seen in the past year. And, you know, if I was running the Academy Awards, I certainly would have all three of the lead actors in this up for some kind of, you know, nomination at the very least. And you know, I thought it was a wonderful film that is about the struggles in life when you have parents who aren't going to make it, you know, and how rough that can be when there's nothing you can do but be on the outside. Yeah, there are many moments in the film where you're in Joe's perspective. He's there on the golf course when his father gets laid off, and as an audience member, I was waiting to see what the boss was going to say to Jake Gyllenhaal to explain why he's firing him. But we don't see it. We cut to Joe. We don't even cut to him. The camera moves to Joe, and you see him looking, and you can just about listen in the background, but he doesn't get the full story. He has to ask his dad later on, so what did he say? And it puts you totally in his perspective, while at the same time, throughout the film, you get kind of the perspectives of the two parents as well. But the driving force of the film is absolutely Joe's story and his perspective. And I thought the way they handled that in portraying his perspective was fantastic. You know, when another man comes into the picture, you know, again, Joe's perspective becomes key in the frustration you feel. And there's just moments in the film where I was just like almost crawling out of my skin with anticipation as to what was going to happen next and how was Joe going to react. Was he going to snap? Was he going to finally just go, ah, and just say what he's feeling? But most kids don't do that. And it felt so right that he didn't, even though I wanted him to, you know? And there's this perfect scene when Jake Gyllenhaal comes back and he asks Joe, you know, so what about this other guy? And it's a really drawn out scene, but it is just like down to the atom. So believable. You know, in any other film, well, not any other film, but in a lot of other films, I feel like that scene would have been like a minute tops. And he would have been like, so what's been going on? And Joe would have been like, well, this happened, and then that happened, and I saw this, you know. But it gets drawn out for, it just felt so, like it gave it the time to breathe and to just, at no point again was I thinking like this is just trying to drive us to the next narrative point. It just felt like watching actual family dynamics and drama play out almost in real time in the way that they realistically would in most, you know, typical families. And again, that final shot, that final scene, it wrecked me. And it isn't one of those films that is like this big emotional film either, I don't think. I really think people might be bored by this, or they wouldn't be particularly moved one way or the other, and might feel frustrated at the distance that the film projects. And I understand that. But it's that distance that is key to kind of Joe's kind of experience. But I also was so moved by how upbeat this kid tries to stay regardless. Like, he just seemed like such a good kid, and you can only imagine that he's such a good kid because he has such good parents, which makes the whole thing even more heartbreaking when you just see these two people who can't get it together to fix their problems. And the ending in that sense is ambiguous, but at the same time I think it, for me, tells a fairly you know, clear story of where that family relationship is heading. But the gesture at the end I thought was beautiful, and I'm using that word a lot, but also to me quite personally relatable. So I'll leave it at that, I think. But I wanted to talk about this film and hopefully get across how much I loved it, and in the hope that some people might see this video and go, okay, I'll give that one a shot. So again, highly recommended. Wildlife, give it a look. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
He's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you.